Anything to say about our intros?
Fantastic, very Tron-esque. Need some good John Carpenter music over the top. That's what it needs.
I agree. And the thing is it kind of reminds me about like being in the movies in the 80s where you get all of those kind of strange like video intros before, and there's a few of them before you actually get.
It's like we've just discovered this stuff, isn't it cool?
Exactly. We can do this now. So I am here today for yet another episode of On Writing, and I am really thrilled to be able to talk with the great Martin Weller, and to talk with Martin today about blogging and his blog. And it's something he's been doing for nearly 2 decades.
That's
and
right.
There's a lot to talk about. So let's dive right in.
Cool.
So one of the things I start with, Martin, and you can take this where you like, is, did you come to writing because of the blog? Have you written before? Were you always like a baby writer? Like, what's your relationship to writing?
I always wanted to be a writer. When I was a kid, I used to like sort of always be writing stories and stuff. So I've always had a good relationship with writing. And I think that when I was a teenager, I wanted to be an author. The great American or great British novel. It's like. And I used to read a lot as well. So writing was kind of my thing. And interestingly, after my PhD, I got a job at the Open University where I then stayed for the next 30 years. And that really suited me because at the Open University, you write your modules. You don't, you're not presenting as a lecturer. So in some ways that really suited my skill set. So, so I was keen on writing. And in the early internet, I used to spend quite a lot of time in forums and stuff, and I quite liked, as you will already be gathering, I'm better at writing and getting my ideas across than I am at speaking.
Don't sell yourself short, Martin. I've seen a number of your presentations, and they're always filled with great analogies, metaphors, and your cultural sensibility, which we'll get to.
And Nabokov said something like, I think like a genius, I write like a distinguished author, and I speak like a child. And I think I'm not sure I think like I have that similar degradation of like expression, I think, through the different mediums. But, yeah.
Now, so one of the things, you talked about, you went to work at the Open University, you wrote your modules, which is really interesting. I hadn't thought about that, right? Like in the US, it's pretty much like you're on stage and how well can you do? But the idea of writing through your coursework and your courseware, so to speak, is interesting. So were you writing for Open University before you got online? Was there like a push for you to publish articles, not like books and scholarly books? Like, what was the situation there?
Yeah, so I joined the Open University in 1995. I've told this story a few times, I think, probably to you, in fact, Jim. But at my interview, I said, have you thought about using this web thing for teaching? And they mistook that as like a deep understanding of the web. Oh, he knows what he's on about. We best get him on board. It was new then. And so I sort of like learned some basic HTML and started doing web pages and stuff. So I sort of joined, and it was a really good time to join that. Just as the internet was breaking, it sort of suited the OU, and I was. I chaired our first undergrad course that was fully online in 1999, and we had sort of 15,000 students. Take that, MOOCs. We had, and so we did that. So I did a lot of writing and sort of publishing. And what the OU taught me was, it's very good at critical feedback, and other people reading your work and commenting back to you, and you have to learn to take that. Sometimes it can be quite brutal, but I thought it's very supportive, but that really sort of hones your skill as a writer, I think. So then a few of the people I knew at the OU, John Norton and Tony Hurst in particular, were already blogging, and in fact, John sort of showed me, so I don't know if people know John Norton, he has a column in the Observer, and he sort of showed me his idea for what became a blog later. He just on his own laptop, he reads so much, he said, I can't keep track of it. So he developed in HTML just like a weekly diary where you would put into each day kind of like the links he'd come across, it's like, and so it was almost like, this was back in sort of 2000, something sort of creating something that was a blog like for himself, you know. It's like, and then so him and Tony were early bloggers, and I kept thinking, I need to kind of give that a go. And it's interesting that even back then I thought it's too late now. I've missed the boat. People are already blogging.
It's 2001, right?
Yeah.
Like blogs are dead.
So I tried a couple of times. I tried on Blogger and stuff, but with different sort of voices and stuff. But it was 2006 when I started with the Ed Techie blog and that sort of thing. But I think it takes a bit of time to get that voice right, and I think we'll come on to that later. But
yeah, it's worth talking about. Before we go there, though, do you think, so you're talking about John Naughton, who wrote extensively about the internet and, you know, some of that stuff. Tony Hurst, who's still blogging like a maniac. And, you know, whether it's AI, whether it's RSS, you know, he's just, you know, there's something about that kind of form of sharing that seems so endemic to the work he does. But do you think, like, there was a zeitgeist in 99, 2000, 2001, when people just, to your point about John Naughton, started creating linked lists or started just trying to document what they were doing, you know, because there's always that idea, like the famous Downs, like I invented blogging or I invented this. And but like, do you believe like more appropriately, it was part of a zeitgeist that a lot of people were starting to invent like independently?
Yeah, I think there was that kind of, in some ways it just became journaling, you know, like people started keeping online journals and stuff. And then I forget, it was somebody launched an early sort of blogging type tool that allowed you to do that. And I think once people started, so I think it's one thing, like, you know, once we think they sort of came to the idea, but I think it was sort of, you know, as you say, the tool lent itself to that. You can publish quickly, you can share stuff, you can link to other stuff you've read, you know, stuff. So it very quickly became a useful tool to kind of keep that journal and sort of and share those thoughts and those resources you were finding. So I think it's kind of, it was a kind of natural evolution, I think, of the technology.
Exactly. And useful because other people were doing that thing, right? Yeah. It wasn't like you were like, I invented it. And everyone said, oh, look what they're doing. I want to share links. I want a diary, right? No, it's the opposite. And so that's an interesting point. But so 2006, you bite the bullet, even though the blogging train is
the last one bold.
So why did you blog in 2006? What was your impetus to say, you know what, I'm going to finally do this?
Well, so I'd done a couple of tries at it, and I could see there was something in it, and I think, you know, it suited my scratching my writing itch. I think, you know, I'd written one book by then, an academic book about e-learning, and I published a few papers, but, you know, they're very formalized ways of writing, you know, academic texts, and I could do that, but, you know, I wanted to kind of be more playful, I think, and stuff. So I started blogging really just to sort of talk around educational technology, and I think, you know, in the spirit of the times, I was blogging a lot about blogging, you know? And to come back to Tony Hurst, he and I would have a lot of these conversations about, you know, what does it mean for academia, for research, for, you know, higher education, all these tools. You know, Tony used to love playing around with things like Yahoo pipes and those kind of things, you know, like, and the RSS feeds, putting stuff in, you know. And it was really interesting time to sort of think about what it meant for that practice. And Tony often used to argue that what he was demonstrating, and I think it's true, that it was about the process rather than the outputs. And too often in academia, we focus on the outputs, you know, the published papers in respectable journals that get you 5 stars or whatever. And Tony's, he didn't have that, but he had like, here's my blog where I'm exploring these ideas going back for years, you know, so you can dip into that anytime. So I think that type of change of perspective was an interesting thing to explore. So like, we were exploring it through the medium, if you like. You know.
Totally. And so like when you got on, were you like, I'm going to write about e-learning. I'm going to write about, you know, movies because you have other passions. I'm going to write about music. Like, what was it? Like, obviously you named your blog Ed Techie, which gives us all a hint, right?
Yeah. So a bit of all of those. So I think my first blog post was about Do you remember the movie version of Thunderbirds? It was terrible.
I don't actually.
My first blog post was about Thunderbirds. It's like a terrible first post, you know. So I think it took me a long time to think about what is it I'm going to write about. And then I did get into more of a groove of writing about, you know, education technology, online education, and what became through the blog digital scholarship or open scholarship. So there was kind of more, there was a thread through it, which that stuff. But I would throw in other stuff. I think also kind of more personal interest stuff also.
So the idea that you spent the first couple of years, and is this fair, of your blog trying to like figure out like what it is I'm going to write about, what is my voice, like how did you figure that out? Like what did you cycle through to get there?
Through trial and error. I think like a lot of people, I can't think of an example, but I've probably got lots of embarrassing posts where I think I'm trying to be a bit edgy, you know, like, hey, I've got a controversial take on this. You know, I still see that a lot online, you know, not offensive, but you know, like he's trying to be a bit, hey, look at me, non-conformist. Some of that stuff, it doesn't ring true, you know, I think. And so I think it took me a while to sort of find that voice. And other times I think, you know, sometimes I would throw in more personal interest stuff. So like, as I cycle through things like talking about running or talking about music, and I think and I think it's appropriate to include those things, but I think I needed to find a way to mesh those in more appropriately. But I think as I gained experience and sort of a platform, I think I learned to be more authentic. You know, the middle of the road, Martin, is probably.
Let's look at this a couple of ways here.
Yeah.
But so if we talk about, you know, 2006, you're cycling through your voice. When do you feel you hit your stride and you start saying, okay, I'm going to start writing about this, and you know, I'm going to have a kind of regular sense of presence in a sphere? And then who are you writing to? Right? Like there's always a big question, like who are you writing to when you finally found that voice, and like what was your milieu?
So I think around 2009, when I was really exploring the digital scholarship stuff, and I wrote a book called The Digital Scholar, which really came out of the blog, and perhaps we'll talk about sort of the relationship between books and blogs later. But like, and that was really trying to explore, you know, use of social media. So around that whole kind of Web 2.0 social media phase, I think that was kind of a really exciting time to explore. And I'm sure, and I said lots of naive things. I did a blog series recently about things I was wrong about. You know, it's quite a long list, but you know, but one of them was like the kind of like, you know, democratization of social media and stuff, and we were all very excited about this kind of stuff at the time. And in some ways, I think that's just a missed opportunity, but also I think in some ways it's perhaps just inevitable. That's what capitalism does to stuff, you know, grinds it down. But you know, I think there was a real excitement about one of the things that I thought was interesting about its implications for scholarship and academia was too often we confuse the accepted process with the sort of intention and the aim. You know, it's like the aim of publishing is to share knowledge with other people. You know, it's like, but it's become so wrapped up with, you know, academic journals that we see that as the thing. You know, it's like these are the good journals to publish in. This is how you go about academic publishing. This is how you write academic publishing. Whereas journals were just the means by which we try to achieve that aim, you know. And now, if you want that same aim, there are other ways to do it. You know, I'm not saying obviously you didn't get rid of journals or anything; they're still very useful. But you know, it was we confuse the kind of the means with the intention, I think, and I think that's what's interesting about technology. Sometimes is it makes us stop and reflect about, you know, what our accepted practices are. And for all its faults, which are many, I think artificial intelligence does that a bit at the moment. It at least makes us stop and think, you know, things like, why do we do assessment? If students can easily cheat on assessment with AI now, why were we doing assessment in the first place? It's like, it wasn't to produce a 1,500-word essay. It was to demonstrate understanding of it. So it kind of makes you reappraise the initial aims, I think.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, at that point, 2009, 2010, you know, this was really starting to kind of bleed into the way in which academia understood itself and publishing. And there were people out there who were saying, like, actually, we can build our own infrastructure for publishing. We can do some of this ourselves. We don't have to go through these routes. So, I mean, there was a sense, and I think always looking back, it's easy to say, like, we had it all wrong, right? And we had definitely some of it wrong, but there was a spirit of, like, there are other ways, right? And there are other possibilities. Whether or not they get co-opted eventually seems to be inevitable these days. But I don't think the spirit of that digital scholarship book was wrong. I mean, we took it at UMW and we worked with our faculty to say, like, look, these are some of the things, the tools we're talking about, like, they have some real grounding in the work you're about to do. And the work, to your point, that you kind of came up through 10 years of schooling and learning a very specific topic to share. So there is that sense that it was, but you talk about taking that work you did in your blog and turning it into a book. And you have done this regularly over the course of your career. And is the blog in many ways the framework or the place where you're working through your ideas that will eventually become, you know, a kind of codified book about those very things?
In a way, although that makes it sound more intentional than it actually has been. So I think the Digital Scholar book, and then I wrote one called Battle for Open, and then 25 Years of EdTech and Metaphors of EdTech. Nearly all of those, I didn't set out to write a book. And some people, and this is perfectly valid things too, some people are like, I want to write a book about X. I'm going to be building it up through a series of blog posts and getting feedback on those chapters, those ideas. Whereas this was the other way around. It was like, after a while, I thought, it's about time I wrote another book. Like, and you look back, I've been sort of thinking about this thing for a while, it's like, and so with all those, maybe 25 years of tech is a bit different, but I thought, I've been thinking around these ideas for a while, and I could go back and look through my blog, and I literally just created a Word document and just found any relevant post and dumped it in there, like just as a starting point, and you find, I've got 30,000 words. It's like, and actually, you don't use any of those words as they are, but at least kind of gives you a framework to start working around. I need to build. I've written something about this. Now I can go away and research it and stuff. So it was really So I think you used the word codified. Maybe that's the way to think about it. The book kind of codified that process of thinking that I've been going through. 25 Years of EdTech was a bit different because I wrote a series called 25 Years of EdTech, or blog posts, because it was I was the president of ALT, the Association for Learning Technology, and it was their 25th anniversary. So, like, for partly to celebrate that, I sort of did a post about each year as a technology, and quite a few people said to me, you should turn that into a book. Like, sounds like a good idea. It's like, so that was kind of a more structural, maybe.
But I've always been really like I've watching you do this, and I always poke fun because that's how I work. But like, I've always been really like, envious is the wrong word. It's not that. I've always been really like, what's the right word? Like, thrilled in a strange way. Thrilled is not the right word. I've always been like, come on, Martin, help me.
Angry.
I've never been bitter and angry. It's not that at all. The right word is kind of like, I've always been fascinated, but it's a little bit, but like fascinated for your ability to go through your own stuff, have the mindset to go back, take it, and then spend time, because you usually go away for like a week or two at some remote place that you'll tell no one about, and no one will ever know, because that's your special writing place. And you'll turn that kind of, thinking and noodling into a book that, like, a lot of people kind of use as what's going on in the world of EdTech. Well, Martin Weller's written a book on it, and it's become that over the course of your career. And I've never had the forethought, or I don't really think my ideas work in that same way. But like, can you tell me a bit? You kind of mentioned the process, but like, you go away, you sit down, you write the book. Like, what's that like?
I mean, I think in some ways, it's like, I mean, academia, so it's like there is a path to writing a book. So there's a kind of structure. So I would have an idea based on the blog, and then like put together a proposal to send off to a publisher. And since the Digital Scholar, they've all been published open access, and I think doing that proposal, this is what the chapters would be, it provides a really good structure. And so then I'll sort of work on it for a bit, and with all of those, I've taken at least a 1 week writing retreat. Big fan of the writing retreat. Go away to some remote cottage in Wales, West Wales, me and my dog, and just write solidly. And it's amazing, within a week, you've got nothing else to do. It's like, and I'm very keen on writing in bursts. So like, I have 90 minutes, no interruptions, writing, take a half-hour break, 90 minutes, and you can do about 5 of those, 6 of those 90-minute bursts in a day, particularly of an evening when you've got nothing else to do, there's no one else there, So within a week, you can really, you don't write the book in a week, but I might go there with like 30,000 words in draft form and come back with sort of like, 50,000 words, that you sort of done. So,
how many words make a book in your mind?
My academic books are quite short. They tend to be about 55,000 words. Now I'm writing novels, which we'll come on to maybe. That's more like 70,000 words. So
that's awesome.
Actually, I've just started a new horror novel about a writing retreat. So come on.
Oh my God. I mean, I'm thinking like
that's
this
is perfect setting, right? Come on.
You're in retirement. Like this is perfect. You should be like, you have a method. I'll go because I want to finally write something beyond my blog, because I'll always write my blog, but like you just really laid out beautifully a method. You got 30,000 words, you do the 90-minute. I got the 90-minute sprint method. It's trademarked. Don't touch it unless you come to my place. I might kill you to make fodder for my new novel, but I really no, and I really love that sense of process, because I followed you when, over the course of many of those books, and you would come back and you'd announce maybe on Twitter, or you write a blog post about it, and you'd be like, I basically have the skeleton and bones of my next book. And I always just thought that was magic. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for, like the ability for you to take all of this raw material from your blog and really create it as a book that becomes a testament to what you were thinking over the course of several years. And let's move to the battle for open, because I think the battle for open comes from a whole series of posts that the whole internet, or at least the EdTech internet, was writing about the rise of the MOOC, the rise of our early machines, right?
That's right. Yeah. So that was a good time to write that. So, and that was like around 2009 was the sort of digital scholar phase, and then 2012, 2011, 2013, 14 was like the MOOCs. And that was an interesting time to be in EdTech, because suddenly there was this big thing happening everywhere, and it's like it was on the TV and and stuff. And
Dave Cormier was like,
we knew all the people involved. It's like it was great. So I wrote the battle for open with MOOCs as just only one asset of that. I talked about open publishing and open educational resources. It really seems to be having a moment, open access things. Maybe not so much now, but it was an interesting sort of avenue to explore. And I think a lot of that came out of like the possibility of the internet to kind of rethink how you did stuff. So that's really valuable. The MOOCs are funny, weren't they? It's like it was interesting. We did I was a co-editor of JIME, an open access journal, and last year, Katie Jordan, my co-editor, did a special issue on 10 years of the MOOC, and we tried to go back to people who published about MOOCs and say, so what are you doing with MOOCs now? And almost everyone was like, no, I've never heard of MOOCs. I don't know what you're talking about. Just disowned it. It's like, I've got nothing to do with that now. Don't talk to me about MOOCs.
MOOCs have been memory hold, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's interesting.
And when you talk about MOOCs now, it's also like sign up and pay X amount. You'll get access to our library. And the whole idea of what was this, like you said, open access explosion was kind of relegated to like, a cheap, wholesaler of educational materials. It was this odd change.
There's a lot of interest in MOOCs around. I've started doing a few now. was playing around with Python recently, and I don't know how to use Python, so I took a few MOOCs on how to program with Python, and I took one on how to listen to jazz. I took one on sports analytics. Just so there's good stuff around there, and I love it. And I think it's good. Sometimes you have to pay, sometimes you don't. I'm all for like sharing knowledge, but this idea that they were going to revolutionize education, it's amazing. All those claims have gone there. Now it's like, oh no, AI is going to do it. Okay, right.
Yeah, here we go. Right, and that's an interesting, point. I mean, you've been in the game long enough, right? You said you worked at Open University for 30 years. You've been blogging for 20. You've been part of these conversations. You have a long view, right? I mean, that's one of the things, right? When you live as long as we do, you can maybe claim. So what has been your kind of, seeing the rise of AI, knowing you've seen the rise of the MOOCs, right? And the LMS and be what it might, what's your take on just not so much whether or not it will, because I think it already has in a lot of ways, years before it even became something like ChatGPT. But what is your take on the rhetoric?
Yeah, I mean, it's frightening, isn't it? Audrey Waters, we both know, writes very well about this, kind of how it's allied also to kind of the whole kind of techno-fascism thing. And I think it's very dangerous. But taking a kind of my middle of the road view again, I think what's the phrase? We tend to overestimate the impact of technology in the short term and underestimate in the long term. And maybe that's true. I think lots of people get very excited about it, and just for everything, it's like, do you want some AI for that? It's like, not really. And I think what's interesting is that all these things are always advertised as a democratizing tool, and they're never a democratizing tool. The whole point about MOOCs was like, hey, it's free education for everybody. And then when we looked at the research, it tended to be well-educated people, who already had a sort of post-grad level qualifications with the people who completed MOOCs. So it wasn't providing that democratization effect at all. In fact, it was increasing differentiation. So I think we'll probably see the same with AI. I think if you're not good at using this stuff, then what AI produces is very mid. Just like it's very obviously AI. Here's some AI images. Here's some AI text. I had a little play the other day. I tried to get Claude and Gemini to write a blog post in the style of Martin Weller. So I gave it my blog address, using a metaphor for artificial intelligence. And I said, try to make it sort of humorous, and that it was just trying so hard. It was just like, hey, hey, kids. It was just, this is really painful. And so very obviously AI. So I think my point is, I think if you don't know what you're doing, or if you're not really good at this stuff to start with, then what you'll produce will be very obviously AI. I think people will become also very quickly turned off by that. But I think if you do know what you're doing, if you're a good writer or a good artist, then you can probably use AI to supplement what you do. So again, it probably will increase that gap, I think. I think it's part of the reason I'm glad I left the Open University is that I was professor of educational technology, and I'd be forced to have to be into AI and have opinions about it. It just bores me.
A hot take.
I don't mind playing with it a bit, and I certainly take some of the bigger social impacts about it. But it's like, I did a keynote in Dublin this year using my metaphor approach. One thing I did say was, and the metaphors I used was the release of rabbits into Australia and the use of DDT, and these were both things sort of like people-made, man-made disasters, environmental disasters, where we release stuff into the environment with kind of hubris and very little concern about its impact, and then years later was discovered the very complex impact it had, and it becomes very expensive to try and undo that. And I wonder if we're doing a similar thing with information ecosystem, if you like, release it. Like anyone who runs a journal now is just inundated with AI written articles and stuff, and so it becomes really difficult, and we're sort of doing this very carelessly. And I wonder whether, if in 100 years' time, people will look back in the same way we look back at the sort of liberal use of DDT and go, "What were they thinking?"
Totally. Yeah. No, and actually you brought up another thing with the idea of the Martin Weller kind of AI blogging is there's a whole new kind of, I don't know, trend that could emerge is not blogging about
Yeah.
blogging, right? Like you don't even have to blog about blogging anymore.
That's not,
Someone else can blog for you about not blogging or blogging.
it makes me laugh when you go into LinkedIn. It's like, do you want AI to write this post for you? It's like, no, I don't want AI to write this. Like I was doing someone's leaving card the other day. It's like, do you want AI to write the message for you? It's like I was getting people AI to write your message on a bereavement card or something.
Exactly. Happy birthday, right? Like that, because I found that it is can be crazy in some of its miscalculations of what it needs to do and not. But okay, I'm interested. And the word I was looking for, Martin, and it took me, this is why I'm not a very good writer. It took me 15 minutes to find it, was respect.
Okay,
I
good.
really respect your ability to do that. And another thing I respect is at some point in your career, and you could probably pin this down, you went back to school. You went back and you got a master's in history, and you would be writing about your experience with that because you were kind of doing the do, right? You taught at Open University, but you're like, I'm going to go and take a master's and do the very thing that I teach. And I couldn't help but think that that's super cool and respectful. And I can't even pass my Italian driver's license. And you're going back and you're getting a freaking master's. I'm blown away by that. But then you really started to kind of dig in on this idea of like what it means on your blog to be somewhat of a historian. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I think she said when you sort of hang around. So I did 2 masters, by the way, an art MA in art and an MA in art history. But why are you there?
Double the respect.
That's right. But that was interesting because like you relearn how vulnerable it is to be a student. You go from being an expert to being like, I'm making really noob mistakes here, because I haven't done any undergrad in art or art history. But yeah, but just to come back to what, yeah. So when you've been around long enough, and I think certainly in internet terms, what did they used to say? Like it's like dog years, and it's like each human year is 7 internet years or something. So like having been around since 95 working in this area, by the time you get like to 2015, it's like you're one of the old hands. Like, back in my day, we used to hand code HTML, it's like, and I think, and partly because I got really frustrated with that, what we come to refer to as the kind of Silicon Valley narrative. We saw it with MOOCs, but the other thing is kind of like, I think one of the articles I read about MOOCs, like, finally, higher education is waking up to the internet. It's like, oh my God, do you think we've been doing nothing with the internet? And that's I ran this course in 1999. It's like 15,000 people on it. It's like, oh no, universities don't know anything about the internet. It's like, so I wanted to try and refute some of that idea and to sort of document what happened in higher education and the things that we've done and and are trialed and develops all those kind of things, because also partly it's like there's a real kind of historical amnesia, and also I think people just don't want to learn the past. Like in this area, it's like, hey, it's all new. It's like, no, we did that. No, I'm not listening. It's new. I don't want to hear about the past. And I think you have to be careful. You can't just sort of like be rolling your eyes in. We tried that, it didn't work, because technology does change. I did my PhD in artificial intelligence. It wasn't very good back then, and if I could have seen what it would be doing now, that's much more like what people had in mind back then. So I think, you have to be prepared that stuff does change. But I think also just the idea that, like, hey, I've invented this. Oh no, please don't.
Yeah. And you did you would do a very good job over the course. And I think a lot of us, another person I deeply respect, Audrey Waters, would bring out that her kind of narrative critique and talk about these narratives and kind of as almost like an investigative journalist, although she doesn't associate as such, do the digging, right?
Yeah.
And you were doing a lot of this kind of history to say, wait a second, like what are we claiming versus what do we know, right? Yeah. And this was a huge gap. And as you can imagine and know, there's very few voices in ed tech that often are not just kind of selling something or doing very little research and just pushing something out there. And it's not a field that comes often with a robust sense of kind of, you know, and I hate to use this term, but rigor, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Of any kind.
Yeah. And you see that a lot with AI. It's kind of like there's a certain tactic that's used. It's kind of like, it's, if you don't get on board now, it'll be too late to get on board. Don't stop and think you've got to get on board now. It's like, you know, you'll be dinosaurs, you'll be extinct. You know, it's like, it's this whole kind of like generating fear in higher education that they have to do it now, otherwise it's too late. And it's like, get on the bus, granddad. I was like, oh, it's over, you know. So.
And I wonder your quick take before I have more to ask you, but one of the things I've avoided AI because, like you, I was like, I don't want to. I have other things I'm interested in. I don't want to have to feel like now's the time. I'm changing Reclaim hosting to Reclaim AI because it is time to
becoming an AI first company. That's
exactly. It's time to, you know, but I was also like, was there any time in this moment where I've seen people, maybe other than Tom Woodward, having fun with AI, like doing things where you're like, oh, okay. Like, and I'm searching for that. For me, it's always the stories and the cool things that lead my interest. And so when everyone's just saying, to your point, like, get on the bus, this is going to change everything. I have no evidence. I have a company though, and I'm looking to, you know, do a big kind of like sellout here soon. I never got a sense that there was any real discussions about anything that what it could be or what it would be versus what people were doing in the now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's interesting. I wrote a report for the N-Tutor project last year and was looking at various technologies and impacts, things like micro-credentials, but obviously AI. When I tried to look for academic articles about how it's being used practically, it's like there was lots of things about how it could be used and how it will be used, but not much about how it was being used. But I think people are. I think that's the thing. It will become like a very practical tool. You know, like, some of the stuff about you know, turning academic papers into podcasts and stuff. I think it's quite useful for a lot of people. You know, it's like my daughter often likes to study that way. You know, it's like, so can find it useful, and I think that stuff's, you know, it's not particularly exciting, but I think it's kind of quite useful and stuff. I'm a bit bored with the whole kind of summary thing. It's like, would you like to summarize that? Should we summarize that? Stop summarizing. But that can be, I guess, if you need to kind of like keep up with a very wide field, you know, you can get it to sort of summarize the publications today and tell me what's been happening. You know. I think I don't really know either. I think I've been trying to explore it a little bit as a creative writer. So I said we'll probably come on to this, but so I've written a horror novel, psychological horror novel,
which is awesome. Congratulations! Another deep respect moment for Martin Weller.
Coming to all good online stores because I probably won't get a proper publisher soon. But like, so I had like 70,000 words, and I tried feeding that into Gemini. And I thought I'll just, you know, do it. And you do get that. It is sycophantic. This is excellent writing. Oh, so excellent. You know, tell me how excellent it is again, please. what was that about my use of dialogue? Yes, it is fantastic. But, to go back to once you learn how to ask it particular questions, it wasn't too bad, actually. I'd find these things that, you know, it's like, so once you can give it a big corpus of text, you know, with a particular style, you know, it's written, it can work quite well then. It's less bad. So I asked it, you know, like, I wanted to extend a chapter. So I asked it to write an extended chapter, and that was just really typical AI kind of bland stuff. But I asked it to suggest ways the chapter could be extended. And that was quite good, actually. And then I could maybe take one or two of those points to, okay, I'll go away and I'll write that. And once I started writing, so it was just like a writing prompt. So that wasn't too bad, actually. So I think, like all these things, once you find a way to use them kind of like within your framework, they can be quite useful. But, you know, I've got no desire to write a book just using AI. Write me this book, you know.
Yeah, and
because also the point is, I want to write the book. It's like I've always wanted to write, but I don't. Yeah. It's not that I want to have a book written with my name in it. I want to do the writing.
And so much of the rhetoric right now is offloading everything.
Yeah.
And that's where I run into issues with it. Now, a quick shout out to Michael Branson Smith, who did do some of the early. So at Reclaim Open in 2023, Michael Branson Smith created an AI version of Alan Levine. And so we pretending that Alan was presenting at the conference. I wanted to do it without telling Alan, but I figured that would be really bad. So we did bring Alan in, and then he came in, and it was fun. But it was like that kind of sense of fun was what the community I had been part of online was always a way of exploring it, but not taking it seriously, or like, you know, the end game wasn't in sight just yet. It was trying to figure out what the tech was and wasn't. And I just don't feel there's been much space for that in AI. And that's too bad. And it's something I miss, and I look for the few people who are doing it, to that credit. But back to,
are you going to do Dr. Oblivion, an AI Dr. Oblivion?
There already is, actually. Michael Branson Smith created an AI Dr. Oblivion that basically he's a chatbot. And so students in DS 106, who Paul Bond was teaching, could go and ask him for advice. And so he was kind of like, just a kind of like fortune tell, like he would give you, and then you would say, you know, Dr. Oblivion, what do you think about the New York Yankees? And he'd always be like, you know, my only focus is on, you know, digital media and AI. I cannot help you. And then he gets sarcastic, which I actually love it. And there's been some fun stuff there. But like, for me, I wish there was more of that before it becomes 0 to 60 and we're all losing our jobs and, you know, we're all doomed, or whatever that case is. Back to writing a little bit, because I don't want to your point, I don't really want to be replaced by an AI, because what would I do? But because I consider myself a writer, even though I'm not much of one. But I do think that you have some kind of, and you've done this, you're very kind of reflective about your process, even with your sense of like, these are the various moments in my career, even to the point where you've been the historian. You really kind of were an outreach during COVID, right? You kind of tried to create a sense of like, we're all in this together. Here's what we know and don't know. Here's where we can take these technologies and do good. And then, like most people after COVID, you were probably like, I'm exhausted. I'm going to go write a horror novel. But like post facto, now you have 20 years of blogging. Like, why are you happy you blogged? Was it a waste of time? Like, what's your relationship to blogging overall?
Blogging is king. So I think I've promised this several times. But I think becoming a blogger was the best academic decision I ever made. I think we already covered that. I wrote so many books on the back of that. I'm not sure I would have written any of those books if I wasn't a blogger. Because I needed that kind of process. But also, it's kind of how I got to know most of the people I know, such as yourself, and obviously like in sort of social media, Twitter, and on top of it. But it's how I made those connections, and it's really provided the basis for my career. Really, I think if I could point to anything as my kind of academic output, it would be the blog. I think that's the main thing. I think it suits me. I mean, it's I'm not saying blogging to everybody. I think it kind of suits my temperament and my style. Because I think I'll big you. I have respect for you too, Jim. And I think you're one of the people I learned from about that kind of integrating popular culture into what you do and how you write as well. Not sort of trying to be too stuffy about it. I think a lot of people, even when they come to blogging, I'm maintaining my academic voice. Where it's like we would use horror film references, or I've used lyrics from songs or something. It's like, and sometimes that jars with people. It's like using a metaphor. Some people like it, some people don't. But I think I like to sort of, it's a scattergun approach. It's like I'll do 10 blog posts. You might not like 9 of them, but you might really like one of them, because it won't be like just a standard sort of piece of writing. So I think that sort of suited me well. I think that sort of combination of popular culture and sort of a bit of humor, I think, and sort of more informal style of writing, I think.
I want to take a moment there, though, when you talk about the humor. There was a post you wrote recently, and people had commented in the comments, and I'm forgetting the post, but you'll probably remember it, where it was like drop dead funny. Like you were like nailing various things, and it was like really like, you had in this blog post, you were just making people laugh. Me being one of them. I mean, Alan saying like, hit after hit in terms of this post. And
oh yeah, that was the one where I was talking about how I was trying to learn new skills, like little skills. Like, so I taught myself whistling, so I couldn't whistle.
Yes, exactly.
I was trying to learn how to ride my bike, no hands. These kind of like skills you should have picked up as a child, but somehow missed out on.
But even that, you're sharing your learning of skills. You're talking about pop culture. You're kind of creating this whole kind of world where, in fact, you have been, and I think I'm fair to say this, as you're kind of retiring and you're kind of looking at maybe a life with interests beyond ed tech, although you've always had interest beyond ed tech. It was apparent in your blog. You kind of have said this on, maybe a Reclaim community chat or in other spaces, like, do I create a different blog? Do I create a different space? Like, what does my voice mean, post a career of an ed tech? And where do I want that to be? Is it an integrated domain, so to speak, or is it something separate? You've had separate blogs. You've had a great movie review blog, which I loved. I think you're a hockey fan, so I'm sure you do some stuff there. Like, how has that picture for you started to settle as you kind of settle into, I won't call it retirement, but almost like a full-fledged writing life now?
Yeah, I'm struggling with it a bit, I think, just in what is the purpose of the blog. I think, previously you had, this title was Ed Techie, so it had a kind of educational technology focus, and so that would meander around the various topics in there. And sometimes there would be some personal stuff thrown in. But at least people who came to it kind of like would come to it for a reason. There was an audience kind of.
Yeah.
And now it's just about me. But my subject is Martin Weller. I'm not sure that's of much interest to everybody. So I'm sort of trying to find out, is there a clear angle, or do I carry on to? I might write a bit about AI, and then I might write a bit about writing fiction, and into those two kind of very different things. It's like, when I was sending my novel off to some agents, they sort of really like people with a big, if you've got a TikTok following of 100,000 people, you're straight in with an agent. It's like, so should I try and build more of a fiction writing focus? It's like, and so I'm sort of noodling around at that, and I don't really know what it is. I'm quite enjoying it. I think, I quite enjoy just writing stuff. And in some ways, like I said, going back to the point, it doesn't matter if people, don't like most of the posts, but every now and then one might trigger. I did one recently about how on Instagram I keep a vinyl account.
Yeah,
so I take pictures of vinyl out and about in South Wales, and there's like a vinyl collection, vinyl community on Instagram, and I blogged about that just because I thought it was a really nice community. And Clint Lalonde, who we both know, said, he said I set up Instagram and set up a vinyl account just to take part in this community and stuff, and how much he really loved it. So I think that's a really good example of how that post probably didn't mean much to most people, but for one person, it kind of like triggered an interest. So I'm happy to keep doing that stuff. But I think, so I'm not sure where the blog will be like in a year's time. I want to kind of, at the moment, I'm feeling a bit, I need to just kind of keep it going. So my experience of blogging is that as soon as you stop, it becomes really hard to get started again. It's like when you're in the mojo of blogging, it's kind of like, Maren and I, my partner, we go out, we have conversations while we're walking dogs. Like, that's a blog post, I could write that. It's like, and you're sort of always thinking in that terms. But when you stop blogging, it suddenly seems like you need to be saying something much more momentous to do a blog post. Well, actually, most blog posts are things that you should be able to knock out in 10 minutes. Here's something that I was just thinking about. So I think I don't want to lose the momentum, but at the moment, I'm not quite sure I know what that identity is. A bit like when I first started blogging, what that voice is. But it'll get there, I'm sure.
It's interesting. I don't know if you're looking for ideas, but one of the things just hearing you talk is the whole process of being now writing novels and trying to figure out how to navigate that world is interesting. Like it itself is an interesting, and it's almost kind of like blogging about writing, which is very close to blogging about blogging.
Yeah. There's all these tools that I didn't know existed. Like there's something called Query Tracker where you can find agents. There's Book Sprout where you can get people to do reviews for your stuff, and there's another site where you can use people who do copy editing or book design. So there's all these services and tools available. So, oh, great.
That's cool. Yeah, it's super cool. So, what has the blog ever done for you, Warren Weller?
Well, I think pretty much
like the Romans. What has the blog ever done for you?
I think it's done a lot of things for me. So I think early on, a lot of the keynotes I used to get, I think, were on the back of being a blogger when it was still reasonably unusual in higher ed. And I think, and I used to write about this in the Digital Scholar Times, but people often used to set up kind of formal scholarship, traditional scholarship, and digital scholarship as being like in competition with each other. But I think they're actually much more complementary. And it's like, so, things that we counter for in traditional scholarship are like publications and keynote invites, but your blog feeds into both of those. So I think it kind of really helped with the kind of formal part of my academic career as well. Getting a chair and stuff. I think all those things came on the back of being a prominent blogger. I think it really helped also having a public profile within the Open University and for the Open University. The OU went through a bit of a crisis in 2018. And it was a real kind of like point where lots of people felt disenfranchised and stuff. And I was trying to blog about that, and but in a kind of respectful way until I completely lost it. I've been partly given responsibility for that vice chancellor losing his job. So
you almost became a champion of the disenfranchised community.
Lots of people got in touch with me after saying like, thanks for writing that. I was at my desk in tears and stuff, and it was good to know that I wasn't the only one and stuff. I did feel like speaking up. So I think you kind of, when I had enough of a profile that I cannot be silenced, the kind of thing. But it was you were kind of a public profile, and also lots of the press got in touch with me after saying, "Oh, we're writing about the OU. Is there anything you want to say about that?" We read your post and stuff, and so it became a kind of public voice. No, not the only one. Lots of people did similar things, about that situation. So I think that was kind of that gave me and that voice a certain sort of weight and credibility, I think. But also, I think it's just probably the best thing is it connects me with great people. A lot of people I regard as friends who I've met often we've met kind of at conferences and things, but sometimes we haven't. Like we've all come through blogging. It's like, so I think it's been really good as a kind of social outlet, I think, for me as well.
It's funny because I was talking to my son about, look, I'm going to be interviewing Martin Weller, and I'm kind of a big fan of his stuff, and I've been reading him for 20 years, and he's like, 20 years, because he's 15. And so I was like, yeah, 20 years. And he's like, yeah, it's just like the YouTubers. You just got to get those posts out regularly over time. And no sooner or later, you'll be somewhat relevant. And, obviously he was joking and kind of, playing, but not really joking. But like, how do you feel about that when you talk about like once you get off the horse, it's super hard to get back on? Has that been part of your kind of relationship to blogging, like the idea of just regularly doing it, not always having something to say, but not always caring? The idea that this is a place where I'm writing and I'm trying to kind of keep a presence, a continuity with my own process over time. Like, has that been a case for you?
Yes. I mean, I used to write in sort of fits and bursts, and I sort of still do it roughly, but I tried to average a blog post a week. It may not be kind of like every week, but for a month. And I slightly cheat by every month I do a roundup post, which is kind of like, here's some things I've been doing, here's some books I've read, here's some records I've bought. It's like, so that kind of gets me a free one, if you like. But even that's quite useful, I think. So, but yeah, I used to sort of stop blogging over the summer, particularly when my daughter was younger, and we'd sort of go away on summer holidays and that. And you come back in September, it's like, right, let's kickstart the blog again. What can I blog about? And it just seems so much more effort rather than just keeping going. And I think you've probably heard this as well. It's like, you can't tell what lands either. It's like, the blog posts I write, I think, well, okay, that blog post is A, perfect, and B, going to change the world. Just sit back and wait. It's like zero comment, zero interaction. And the other one, which is like a 10-minute blah, blah, blah. Here's a vapid thought. Great, love it. Great post, Martin.
Exactly. So 30 comments,
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. That has been my complete experience. I wrote this post on, on a Fellini movie about the 30s and fascism and links to now, and trying to like put out, and my son read it. He's like, that's a real good post, Dad. I'm like, yeah, I'm proud of this. Put it on the blog. Crickets, right? Unbelievable. Then I write something about Madden 2001 and AI, and I got 10 comments. I'm like, what? It doesn't make any sense at all. But that's kind of also what I love about it. Like, it's not, it's not a predictive science in any way. And that's part of that idea of like having an idea and just expressing it, and having that kind of fortune. Like, I feel like it's a great fortune to be in a space where I can express these ideas and do these things, and then talk to other people who are doing the same, and knowing, like, by definition, we're bloggers. So like, we're the lowest of the low when it comes to writers. Like, we are the B movies of writers. And that's kind of what I like about it. And that's why I remember when Audrey Waters and why am I forgetting his name? Anyway, a couple of people who were at UMW, and they were like, yeah, we're ready to write a book. And I was like, a book? You're gonna, like, I felt it was almost like a betrayal. Like, we're bloggers. We don't write books. We blog.
We burn books.
Exactly.
So some ways, I think I'm privileged. You and I are privileged in that we did start blogging early, and so you do build up that just sort of general readership. People sort of know you exist and stuff. And if I was starting blogging now, I'm not sure I'd get away with just writing random stuff about what I'm up to, kind of stuff. So I think there is, in some ways, like, time is a privilege. It's like you've kind of managed to build that from when it was early and there weren't so many people around. I remember this metaphor may not work, but I think someone like I think it was Pink Floyd said, when they recorded maybe Dark Side of the Moon, everyone was raving about it. They said there weren't that many bands around. It wasn't as packed as it is now. So you could have this time to experiment, and also you could have a much wider listenership than you might have got otherwise. And there just wasn't as many things that you compared to now, like in the music scene. There's just like millions of people sort of streaming and stuff. So I think when we were first started blogging, if people were starting to read blogs and said like, can you point me to some higher education bloggers? We could have. You could name 50 of them, couldn't you? It's like and probably all overlap with the recommendations. So.
But to your point earlier, where you were like, it was 2001 or 2003, and I was like, oh, I'm too late into this blogging. And I wonder if now, despite the fact, and I agree with you, it's a bit flooded just writing in general online. But like, at what point do you do or not do it, right? Or do you like decide I'm going to create this space and create these connections and start reading other people and start commenting and start linking? And like, I think some of the work that went into creating a blog and linking and talking is forgotten, right? Like, it means reading other people's posts. It means linking to them. It means commenting. It's a whole thing. It's not just, right, here's my great written work. Why isn't anyone reading it? Right? It's like, well, what are you doing on the other side? To your point, almost about a writer now has to be a TikToker, right? Has to be a great artist, graphic artist, and all the other things. Like, I don't know, but I wonder, maybe this is me just being old and like, you need to work harder for your blog, But
in my day, we used to dig gardens with spoons and with lightning. But I do miss Twitter as a kind of like.
Me too.
Don't tell Alan Levine that I called it a town hall, but I do miss it as the kind of town hall. It's like, because everyone was, and that's how you would come across stuff. It's like, I still haven't got back into having an RSS reader and reading stuff. So stuff doesn't come to me as easily. It's like, and I've tried the others, but also I think that time for that kind of general social media has gone. It's not that Blue Sky or Mastodon aren't as good. It's just people have split up and gone elsewhere, and people just don't use it. So in some ways, we were using Twitter because it was new. It's like, oh, this is fun. Look at these connections I'm making. But that's how I used to come across everyone's posts. It's like, now it's really, I might see stuff that crops up in one of these places, but it's much less of a kind of like, regular thing. I used to almost rely on Twitter. I don't need to worry about stuff, because if it's interesting, I know it will bubble up kind of through my network. That's probably not the case now.
Yeah, and I mean, you talked about it earlier, and I will end this episode at some point. I promise. I just love
4 days later.
Yeah, but you know, one of the things when I was talking with my son before doing this, and I was like, you know, it's funny because I've never done anything overtly like commercial on my blog, like, and that's been purposeful.
Yeah.
But I'm like everything I have, and as a result, you have, is as a result of me writing these stupid words on this blog. Like my business right now, my getting a job, my everything is an indirect result of putting myself out there. And I think authentically. I'm not faking. I'm not actually that different from the words I write.
We know you're at home usually wearing a business suit and investing in cryptocurrency. It's all a facade, Jim. We know.
Let's not talk about this on this cast, please. This was part of the NDA you signed. I don't know if you're clear on that. But like, do you feel the same way in regards to that? And if so, like, what would you recommend to other people? Like, maybe it's not writing or blogging, but like someone else reading, watching this and assuming, wanting to think about their own writing or career or, you know, starting somewhere else. Like, what would you say to them?
I mean, I used to do the kind of like, everyone should become a blogger talks. And I'm sort of like less evangelical about it now, I think, because being online is itself kind of much more of a potentially toxic environment. But I think just learning that process of articulating and sharing and sort of finding a network of people is really useful, I think, and just documenting your thoughts as you go along. So like I mentioned when I came to write the books, so often I'd be like, I need to write something about whatever. Actually, I wrote something about that, didn't I? And I'd go back, because I forget this stuff. I'd go back a couple of days, there's a post. Not only was there a post for it, but there'd also be underneath it some really good comments. Oh, those people are even smarter than I am. So I'll take their comments, and that would be a really good basis. Like, but I think you just forget that stuff, you know, and keep, you might keep an offline journal, maybe, but I think just something about the process becoming valuable to you as well, you know, and documenting the process as much as the outputs.
Well, Martin, I want to thank you for taking time to writing about blogging, to blogging about blogging, and for even talking about blogging for the last hour with me. I respect your work tremendously. I consider myself a big fan, and I want to thank you for joining us on Writing today.
Thanks, Jim. Blogs for life.
Can we do it while I get the outro? That's what I'm doing right now. I'm looking for the outro. Oh, Jim, you're so elegant. For life.
For life. Is that right? I've got the other way around.
Yeah, for life. There you go. Yeah.